putting that all aside, I want to talk about Joe Burrow specifically for a minute, because what he's doing with his legacy in a short amount of time, at the end of his third season, is nothing short of miraculous. Joe Burrow now has 3 road playoff victories in only his third season. To give you context, Peyton Manning had 3 road playoff victories in his entire NFL career. You know who right now has the number 1 passer rating in the playoffs so far this season? Joe Burrow does. And going into Sunday's AFC title game to face off against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, who Burrow is 3-0 against them, by the way, it sparked the debate. Of all of these things, it's now sparking the debate, who is really now the best quarterback in the NFL? And does this coming Sunday's game in the AFC title game, does that actually matter in this debate? Because if he wins, Joe Burrow would be 4-0 in back-to-back Super Bowls over Patrick Mahomes. Now, I will say this, wins are not a QB stat. They're not. It pisses me off when people bring up wins. It's a team stat. It's a head coaching stat. But I understand why we bring it up with quarterbacks, because quarterback plays the most important role on a team. But I also don't think that this upcoming game matters to the debate of whether Burrow is in the league's best quarterback or not. I don't think it matters. I don't think the win or loss in the rematch really settles that debate. I think the debate has already kind of been settled. I think Joe Burrow has already proven that he's better than Patrick Mahomes. And there's number 1 reason why. In a word, inheritance. Inheritance. What did you inherit? Patrick Mahomes inherited a Hall of Fame coach, got to sit behind Alex Smith, was in one of the best run organizations in the NFL, the Chiefs, run by the Hunt family. They have one of the best offensive lines that he inherited, and then they rebuild for him. Who they also, by the way, before Patrick Mahomes was ever even drafted by the Chiefs were a perennial playoff roster before he was even drafted, multiple years before he even got into the NFL. Joe Burrow, on the other hand, he inherited a poverty franchise, one of the most dysfunctional owners in the NFL, the poorest owner in the NFL, and the cheapest owner in the NFL. There's a difference between poorest and cheapest. They don't even have an indoor practice facility. Their draft strategy is essentially the same draft strategy that they have from the 1980s, that they haven't updated whatsoever. He inherited a rookie head coach who had been fired, not as a college head coach, but as a college offensive coordinator a few years prior. Wasn't good enough to be a college OC, but now was an NFL head coach because he had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay, and that got him that head coaching job. He also had the worst offensive line in football the previous 2 seasons, bar none. No one has been had received more quarterback pressures and quarterback hits than Joe Burrow the previous 2 seasons. With a franchise that hadn't won a playoff game, period, in over 30 years, before Joe Burrow was even born. And in only 2 seasons, he's led them to more road playoff wins than Peyton Manning has his entire career. Inheritance. What do you inherit versus what have you accomplished? You want to talk more about inheritance? I'll go even further. Physical talent. What do you inherit with physical talent? That's inherited as well. Who's more physically gifted? Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow? Who has a stronger arm? Who can throw it the furthest? Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow? Who can run the fastest? Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow? All that stuff matters. Josh Allen, you can say the same thing. Who's more talented? No one's saying Joe Burrow, yet one is outplaying the other the last 2 seasons by far. Not just in wins and win-to-win matchups with teams, but just also in their play. The stats prove it. I mean, it's like saying there are 2 kids. You take 2 kids, and they both grow up to become billionaires. Well, one kid came from a trust fund family that lived in the Hamptons, and the other kid grew up in a trailer park raised by one parent. Both are billionaires, but not equal accomplishments. What do you inherit? That's what makes Joe Burrow right now the best quarterback in the league. I don't necessarily care what happens this Sunday. Well, I do care. I want him to win. I don't care how it looks. I don't care about necessarily just the stats, even though his stats right now are proving that he's statistically has the best quarterback rating, better than Patrick Mahomes. I don't care about that. I care about what he inherited relative to what everyone else inherited. Physically, mentally, organizationally, all that stuff. And the last thing I'll say about Joe, why he's able to do this, besides all the physical stuff that he can do, and the mental stuff that he can do, which is so important to playing quarterback, Joe Burrow, his greatest ability is he has the ability to change other people's habits. One of the hardest things, maybe the hardest thing to do in the world, is change your own habit. And that's something you have control over, but it's still one of the hardest things to do. How do you change as a person? Change your habits, change yourself, change your perspective, all that stuff. You have control over it, and it's still one of the hardest things you'll ever do. What's even harder is changing other people's habits and changing other people's perspective, because you have zero control over that at the end of the day. Well, Joe Burrow has done that. He has changed other people, including and especially the Bengals front office that was cheap, dysfunctional, and outdated. So, hey, I need you to spend more money in free agency on defense before I even started a game my rookie year. Done. What else do you need? Oh, this year I need more money in free agency on the offensive line. Done. The Bengals had never done that in their entire history until Joe Burrow came. And they had other franchise quarterbacks in the past that they tried to build around, and they still didn't do it. Ken Anderson in the 80s led them to a Super Bowl. Boomer Esiason, also in the 80s. He led them to a Super Bowl as well, just like Joe. Carson Palmer, MVP of the league. Andy Dalton, multiple playoff appearances, multiple division titles. They still never changed their habits or who they were as an organization. The gift of changing others despite what you inherited. That's why Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in the NFL. And it'll certainly be an exciting game. I think right now, my biggest concern was the offensive line for the Bengals. Would they still be able to run the ball like they did? Because that's what opened them up. Turns out it hasn't stopped them. The injuries haven't stopped them whatsoever. And the Chiefs, I wasn't impressed. I haven't been impressed with them the last month of the season. I wasn't impressed with them against a team that they matched up very well against at home in the Jacksonville Jaguars. I said the Bengals would go to the Super Bowl before the playoffs started. I was weary on that after the first game, but now I'm back. I think it's Bengals. Now, who the hell knows what happens with the Eagles in San Francisco? But I think Bengals go back to the Super Bowl. And the way that O-line is playing, that was the one thing that kept them from winning it last year. The one thing. So they may actually